A friend and I planned a trip to Hawaii, but since the two idiots lived in different states and our work hours differed, we decided to meet directly at our destination. I'm not that big a fan of solo flying, but if I wanted to see those numbskulls, I needed to do this since it's rare for us to meet like this. The time for my flight that was to depart was from San Diego was 9:35 p.m. and it was to land to my destination around 3 in the morning. So I finished my work in a jiffy and headed out a bit earlier than usual. Right after I got out of the office at around 6 p.m., I headed straight to my apartment, grabbed my already packed bag, and called myself a cab. I was up all night packing my stuff and couldn't get enough sleep, so I was feeling a bit tired. Still, I got to the airport on time and went ahead for the formalities. The flight had been a bit delayed, so I was told to wait around till the announcement. I went ahead and took a seat, putting my earpods on, and I started watching Young Sheldon. I had watched Big Bang Theory and had been meaning to watch this for quite a while, but as I was always too busy with work, I couldn't get the time to do that. As I was watching the show, I looked up to see how long it would take for them to make the announcement, and that was when I noticed a man walking in my direction. It felt like he was staring right at me as he walked. Could have been my imagination, but I swear that I saw a slight smile on his face for a brief moment. The man walked closer and sat next to me. I thought, what the hell? There are so many empty seats, so why is he so close to me? I acted as if I wasn't fazed by this, and whilst pretending to be on a phone call, I got up and moved toward a different seat. After a while, the man also got up and again sat next to me. I was speechless. Well, more pissed to be honest. Was he trying to follow me or something? I didn't know if I was imagining things due to sleep deprivation, but it still felt a bit awkward, so I tried my best to avoid him. While I was focused on the phone, I could feel his gaze on me. It was like he was trying to watch inside my soul or something. There was no way I was going to let this slide. So I lifted my eyes from the phone and looked over at him. He flinched for a second, but then gave me the same weird, disgusting smile I saw earlier on his face. There had been a few times when I had to face such weird men in my life, and it was equally unpleasant and creepy each time. But in my opinion, every girl might have to some point. Even though I was feeling a little stuffy inside my chest and was slightly scared, I knew there were people around who would back me up if he tried to pull something. So I called him out. "Excuse me, sir, can you move a bit further for me?" The moment I said that, his expression changed. He furrowed his eyebrows and angrily stared at me. "I don't believe you own these seats, so I don't have to do as you say, and nor am I going to." What the hell? This man was creepier than I thought, so I decided not to pay him any attention and I got up. Very well then. I walked away to stand in the corner instead of sitting anywhere, and as I was walking away, I couldn't help but notice him getting exacerbated by me. Just when I thought he would take the hint that I was getting annoyed by him, he shamelessly got up and stood next to where I was standing. And trust me, at this point he was ruffling my feathers to the point where I was about to shout at him. But still, to be honest, I was feeling a little terrified as well. I mean, who wouldn't when some creepy strange man keeps following you? There was security and I could report this person, but it would only make a mess of things and I might end up missing my flight. But before I could warn him of his actions, I heard the boarding announcement, so I decided to let it be. He wouldn't possibly follow me inside the plane, right? But as I walked toward the gate that led to my flight, I noticed him following me with a hysterical smirk on his face. Now here I can tell that my blood had started to run cold thinking if he had the same destination as me. And if we were on the same flight, he could try to do something to me after landing. What would I do then? I was panicked and confused, unable to understand what to do. But as I crossed the gate, I couldn't help but turn to see if he was still behind me. He wasn't. Instead, I saw him giving a big creepy smile while standing right outside the gate while waving at me. It still gave me a weird chill down my spine, but I took a sigh of relief while thanking God that he stopped. Guess he had a different destination from me. Still, the thought that he could have been on the same flight puts the wind up. It's not like I'm implying that he had ill intentions toward me, but one could never know what malice others harbor and to what extent they are willing to go just to harm others. Thankfully, I reached Hawaii on time and met my two friends there. While I was with them enjoying myself, I forgot all about that little encounter of mine. That week was fun as we tried out multiple things together, ate different food, went to a few interesting tourist spots, and took some memorable pictures of us together. The time went by flying, and I was once again back to my same old work routine. Tonight after dinner, as I went to watch some news on the television and started turning channels, as I was doing this, I paused as one local news station was broadcasting about a group of men who were targeting women at the airport and kidnapping them. These people were involved in a large-scale sex trafficking business, and their targets were single women and gullible women at the airports. They would often work at night when these poor souls were either arriving somewhere or were about to fly off. After somehow getting their attention, the culprits would talk to them like any normal person, and when the chance arrived, they would somehow make those women pass out. Then, pretending to be their friend or family member, those monsters would take them outside and disappear with the victims. Luckily, a female FBI officer went undercover and brought this to life while risking her neck to make the mission a success. There were around 15 women and 7 men rescued after the mission, and they were all in bad shape. After getting the treatment and giving their alibi, they were sent home safely. As the news ended, I turned the TV off and leaned back on the couch. That's how I was reminded of the man at the airport. I was lucky that I was being cranky that day, or else I would have been among one of those victims. That's why one should always be aware of their surroundings and the people who approach them, because you never know what hidden motives they have that might lead you to a life-threatening situation.
My name's Linda Brown, and I've recently moved to this town. Due to my mom's influence, I've come to love shopping at Target. And the good thing about this place is that the store is just a few blocks away from my apartment. At least that's what I thought before that incident. I was thrilled to discover Target 5 minutes from my place, so I went there to buy some stuff for my new home. Shopping in my comfort is something I love, and that store had just that. The woman who worked as a cashier was amiable, making me a regular at that place. But then one day, she told me she was going on pregnancy leave, and another cashier would join the next day as her replacement. A week later, I saw a man in his late 20s instead of her. I can't say why, but something felt strange about it. And while it might have been my imagination, I was subconsciously hyper-aware of the new cashier. The way he looked at me while ringing my items felt uncomfortable too. It wasn't just then, but whenever I visited Target after that, he would stare at me weirdly, scanning me from head to toe, making me highly edgy. So I decided not to go there anymore and chose a different store to buy whatever I needed. One day, when I was walking back from shopping, I noticed him standing on the road I needed to pass by, smoking. I tried my best to ignore him while his gaze followed me, and as I walked past him, I couldn't help but notice him mouthing some vulgar word to me. A strange fear crept up to my skin, making it crawl, but I successfully managed to walk away. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. As I headed home from work one evening, I spotted him standing by an alleyway. It was as if he had anticipated my arrival that time, sending chills down my spine. These weird coincidences kept repeating, which made me think he was stalking me. And the fact that he would always say some bad words to me was getting on my nerve too. So I reported this to the police. He did not get arrested since he had done nothing to harm me yet, but he did receive a restraining order. I thought it all would end there, so I loosened up a little. It was the weekend that day, so I was relaxing at home when Jade called me. She wanted me to visit the salon with her, more like threatened me into coming since I wanted to laze around all day. I wasn't even surprised that she spent 3 hours there and then dragged me to buy a dress for her upcoming date night. Jade, can I please go home? I'm tired from all the walking. I stopped in the middle of the road and whined like a kid. Fine, you can, but after getting some drinks. I was about to throw a tantrum at her words when she grabbed my hand and pulled me with her. I did go to the bar with her, but despite her forcefulness, I denied having a drink since I used to experience a nasty hangover whenever I had glasses. It was around 8:40 or 45 p.m. when I reached home only to find the apartment door unlocked. I was sure I locked it behind me when I headed for Jana's, which meant someone had broken in. 911, what's your emergency? The female operator asked on the other end. Someone has broken in my apartment, I said, giving her my address. She told me some officers would reach my place within 15 minutes and asked me to stay careful by then. I went inside with silent feet while carefully scanning the area, praying not to run into whoever was in there. That was when I heard footsteps coming from my bedroom and walked there sneakily, only to notice it was a mess. My clothes spread all over the floor while my undergarments were on the bed, along with a man who was lying over them. At first, I couldn't see his face, but when he turned around, it was him, that new cashier at Target. He had a nasty grin, and his eyes rolled back while touching himself. The scene horrified me so much that I ran outside my house. The thing he was doing was so nasty that it sent shivers down my marrow, and I started to feel nauseated. He probably heard me, for he ran after me and caught me, and before I could scream, he put a hand over my mouth, slapped across my face from the other, and started dragging me inside. I struggled and tried to get away from him, but he started punching me to keep me under control. A kick came to my gut as I blocked the door with all my force, since my senses told me that if he managed to take me inside, he would do something horrible and irreversible to me. Tears started to fall from my eyes as I received multiple kicks that followed the first one. He looked at me with that evil smile still on his face, with monstrous intent. Thanks to my quick thinking, I had already called 911 because that was when the officers arrived and pulled him away from me. I coughed up blood as I fell down to the floor. One of the officers came to my aid and asked if I wanted them to drop me at a hospital on their way to the police station, but I refused. The man glared at me till the end, but I was relieved he was arrested. I should have just stayed at Jenna's, I thought, as I leaned against the wall. That night, I spent wailing and taking painkillers to subside the pain. I threw the clothes away that were on the floor the following day, as they only haunt me. Even though I got my injuries checked at the hospital the next day, and they disappeared within a week, something continued hurting me. Nothing happened after that, but the fear of him being there continued to lurk inside my mind. The creepiness, the smile, and that horrible scene had imprinted on my brain, reminding me each day that someone else could be as twisted as him, just waiting to strike. No matter how hard I try, I cannot make him disappear. He is there when I'm working and a male employee looks at me. He is there when I'm at a cafe buying my favorite coffee. I was never this paranoid person, but now that I'm suspicious of every person, whether they are friendly or rude, it makes me sick.
Intruder. I'd been working for almost 12 hours straight, and by the time I got home, I was completely drained, both physically and mentally. As I walked into my bedroom, I could feel a wave of relief wash over me at the thought of finally being able to relax. However, just as I was about to lay down on my bed, my phone suddenly made a sharp notification sound, jolting me out of my tired stupor. Wondering what could be so urgent, I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my phone, squinting at the bright screen in the dimly lit room. Upon unlocking my phone, I noticed a message from an unknown number displayed on the screen. The message read, "Do you miss me? I wish you remember our first kiss." As I read the words, a chill ran down my spine. I felt a wave of unpleasant memories flood my memory. That evening, I had been waiting outside the bar for Casey, my girlfriend, for a few minutes. As I stood there, I felt a sudden touch on my back, which startled me. I turned around to see a girl in a green jacket smiling at me. She was quite beautiful, with long brown hair and sparkling brown eyes. However, something about her made me feel uneasy and creepy. Maybe it was the way she was staring at me with a hint of intensity. Her smile appeared to be a little too weird, and it seemed like she was trying too hard to make a positive impression. She asked me if I wanted to join her inside the bar, but I politely declined, and I told her that I was waiting for my girlfriend. Her smile faded, and her face contorted into an unpleasant expression before she walked inside the bar. A few minutes later, Casey arrived, and we headed inside the bar. We were having fun, enjoying each other's company, when I felt a sharp gaze on us. Casey noticed it too, and started to look around uncomfortably. I saw in the direction of the gaze and noticed the same girl sitting on the counter, staring at us. When she saw that we noticed her, she quickly looked away. As the night went on, I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was still watching us. Finally, I asked Casey if she wanted to go to my place, and she agreed. While driving, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror as I felt like someone was following us. But every time I looked, there was no one there. As soon as we arrived at my apartment, I felt a sense of unease. I scanned the surroundings, looking for any sign of danger. Even though I couldn't spot anyone suspicious, I still had a nagging feeling that someone was watching us. Not wanting to take any chances, I turned to Casey and asked her to stay close to me as we walked inside. After locking the door behind us, we made our way to the living room, where we settled on the couch. We spent some time scrolling through the movie options until we finally settled on a romantic flick. As the movie progressed, we grew more comfortable with each other's presence, and the room was filled with the sound of laughter and whispered comments. Eventually, we found ourselves wrapped in each other's arms, our lips meeting in a passionate kiss. We made love for what felt like hours, our bodies intertwined in a frenzy of desire. Finally, exhausted yet content, we fell asleep in each other's arms, and the warmth of our love still lingering in our bodies. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling a light touch on my hair. My first thought was that it must be Casey, my girlfriend, trying to wake me up. Without opening my eyes, I reached out and grabbed the hand, but when I finally opened my eyes, I was shocked to see the girl who had been outside the bar earlier that night standing at the edge of my bed. My heart started racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. How had she gotten into my apartment? Why was she touching my hair? I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that we were not alone in the room. I considered getting up and confronting the intruder, but my body was paralyzed with shock and fear. Suddenly, she leaned in and kissed me, and I was too stunned to react. It wasn't until I regained my senses that I pushed her away. The commotion caused Casey to waken. She was shocked to see a stranger in our house and demanded to know who she was. As I told her I didn't know her, the girl grabbed the table lamp and lunged at Casey, but before she could do anything, I grabbed her. As I prevented her from doing anything, I instructed Casey to call 911. Casey frantically dialed 911. Her fingers shaking with fear, she recounted the events of the last few minutes to the operator. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens pierced through the silence of the apartment. The police arrived, their presence providing us with a sense of relief and safety. As the officers escorted the strange, creepy girl outside, her eyes locked onto mine with a piercing intensity that left me feeling uneasy. Though she was being taken away, her stare seemed to bore into me, sending shivers down my spine and leaving me with an uneasy feeling. I am relieved to say that I never laid eyes on that girl again after that terrible experience. She gave me such an uneasy feeling that stuck with me for a while. I remembered hoping that I would never have to cross paths with her again. The thought of encountering her once more made me feel anxious and on edge. However, as time went on, I gradually forgot about her and moved on from the experience until today, when I received this message.
I think I'm losing my mind because I have been unable to control my rage for the past few days. Though I was supposed to get married 3 days ago, I am on the run because of something I couldn't control. It all started when I was getting ready for the ceremony, and I heard those two bastards say something inappropriate and personal about Mia. They were her friends, and she always hung out with them, so there was no way what they said could be wrong. It simply had one explanation. She did those things they were discussing among themselves. I clenched my fists to calm myself, but it wasn't working. I worked hard these past few months to control my blind rage, but hearing about her cheating on me made it all go to waste. I wanted to ask her if what they said was true, hoping for her to deny them, but as I walked to her chambers, I found the same guys laughing and talking to her. She was making a fool out of me. Did she think I was this gullible? Who knows if that child in her womb was even mine? All of a sudden, I felt disgusted with her. I had to pay them back for humiliating me like this, so I waited for those two guys to go someplace quiet. Till then, I decided to stand by. But the moment I saw Mia's parents talking to them, I could feel my eyes burning with exasperation. Were they all involved in this? This thought was like oil in my fury. There was no way I would wait for the right moment anymore, so I decided to act. "Hey guys, do you mind helping me with something?" I asked, my fist still clenched, but a forced smile was on my face. "Yeah man, what is it?" the one in the blue suit asked. They probably thought I was nervous and couldn't guess what was coming. "It's something I planned for Mia, but I don't want anything to go wrong because it's for after the wedding ceremony. So you guys need to come with me," I said, trying to be as convincing as possible. "Sure," they said in sync and started following me. I led them to the closed gift room, and the moment they entered, I took out the screwdrivers from my pocket that I grabbed from the man who was here to fix lighting, and before they could turn back, I stuck them on the side of their heads. They couldn't even scream as their eyes widened before they dropped dead instantly, without even realizing what happened to them. I heard a gasp and turned around, only to find Mia's cousin Lily. As she was about to scream, I put my palm over her mouth and pulled her inside, only to stab her in the neck. I left her with the other two, fixed my clothes, and headed to Mia's chambers. She was sitting in white, looking stunning, and my heart wavered momentarily. But realizing how this striking beauty cheated on me without a heartbeat fumed me. I started walking toward her, but a couple of giggling girls stopped me before I could enter. "You can't go in there. You aren't allowed to meet her till the ceremony." After saying that, they dragged me to where the ceremony was to commence. I wanted to stop their giggling immediately, but it would attract too much attention, so I played along. I stood at the altar waiting for her arrival as the groomsmen stood beside me. It felt like they were taking forever to bring her here. Suddenly the song started, and with exasperation, I glanced at the end of the aisle when I saw her entering with a smile, only to drop my jaw in awe. I nervously tugged at my tie without even realizing it. She approached me with a look in her eyes that I believed was love. I remembered what it was that made me fall for her. That beaming twinkle on her lips made my heart race, and those deep, innocent eyes made me want to drown in them for all eternity. I couldn't see her properly before, but she looked ethereal in that dress. Her hair pulled back in complex braids to form an intricate design around her face. A thought crossed my mind that maybe I could forgive her this once. Perhaps I could ask her later if what those men said was true. I took a deep breath and picked up the box containing her ring. I grabbed her soft little hands and put it on that fragile finger. It was then her turn to put a ring on my finger. Her light touch sent multiple jolts down my body. My eyes filled with tears as I heard her say her vows. I couldn't believe it. Such sincere words with such a gorgeous yet deceiver's mouth. Those men's words echoed in my ears as I realized I had already once been deceived by this enchantress. My mind started to spin, and I couldn't control it any longer. I put my right hand inside my pocket, grabbed the screwdriver still in there, and as she leaned for a kiss after saying I do, I took it out and stabbed it in her heart. Multiple gasps in horror followed my action, but my eyes were stuck inside those green ones that widened in disbelief. I felt something stinging my heart as I saw her white dress turning red. Tears began streaming down my face as I heard her ask why as she stumbled. I didn't let her fall and held her in my arms as her body gave up. Screams erupted all over the corners while I only focused on her as I replied, "Because you cheated." My voice quivered. I didn't expect the reaction she gave me as she took her last fading breaths. It tore my heart apart in 1,000 pieces as I realized I couldn't see her anymore. That was when I heard someone scream her name. I turned to see another girl with a physique similar to my Mia running toward the source of the voice. I felt my heart sinking as I realized what just happened. It wasn't my Mia who was unfaithful. My world came crashing down my head as I realized I destroyed everything with my own hands due to my insecurity and lack of faith in her. I hugged her lifeless body tightly and screamed her name, calling out for her. But she didn't respond. She was gone. That was when I heard someone say they had called 911, and I realized I couldn't stay here. I glanced at my love for the last time before standing up and running out of the wedding hall. Everyone was so panicked that they didn't even realize I was gone. I've been hiding in these woods since then, and I cannot help but feel anger at everything. I need to go to her. Yes, that would be the only possible salvation and way to reunite with her. Now, all I need to do is find that valley.
It was the day when I was finally going home for Christmas, and my flight tickets had been already booked by me using a mobile app. I was supposed to fly from California, Los Angeles to Denver, Colorado, and since it was a 3-hour flight, I made sure to properly hydrate myself. A night before my flight, I went shopping in a nearby market area from where I brought a few Christmas presents for my family. My little sister Lucy loved the Disney movie Frozen and was a huge fan of Olaf the Snowman, so I bought Olaf's stuffed toy for her. After coming back home, a bit tired and hungry from all the walking in the market, the first thing I did was to have dinner before I was to start packing. By the time I was finished, it was already 11 p.m., and since my flight was at 6 a.m. at dawn, I had to go to bed early. But as I was lying in bed, I couldn't sleep a wink due to the excitement and nervousness about going home after so long. Still, I was able to get some shut-eye before I woke up at 4 a.m. to get ready. After I was done, I booked a cab for the airport, and within a few minutes, my cab driver called to confirm my pickup location. He gave me another call when he reached the location, and as I was already waiting outside, I caught up to him. Upon reaching the airport, I went through all the necessary checking and procedures before boarding the flight. As I was done, they told me to wait in the lobby, so I went ahead and found a place to sit. While I was scrolling through my phone, I heard the announcement to board the flight. As I was scrolling through my Instagram feed, I saw a post that stated that there was a virus breakout in Wuhan, China, which was spreading at an alarming rate, and people were dying. I did feel bad for them as the feeling of sympathy rushed for a bit, but then I scrolled up. Little did I know at the time that it wouldn't just stop there. A man wearing a dark gray hoodie and a mask was sitting next to me, which I didn't even realize until I got up from my spot.
We were standing in a queue to board the flight, and they made a special announcement to wear masks. I didn't have one, so I asked an officer, "Excuse me, sir, may I know the reason for this?" He turned his head toward me and replied, "Ma'am, you might not have heard, but there's a virus outbreak across the globe, and the government just made it mandatory to wear masks. We're just following the orders, please cooperate with us." That was when I remembered they were providing masks at the entrance, and had sanitized our clothes and luggage as well.
We boarded the plane and went to our respective seats. From that moment onwards, several announcements were being made, but I couldn't focus on any one of them because of the person sitting next to me. It was the same person from the airport lobby with the dark gray hoodie, and by the looks of it, he was probably asleep. I couldn't tell as his face was covered with a mask, and he had his eyes closed the whole time. There was an uneasy feeling taking over me for some reason, so I tried to get some sleep. The flight reached Denver, Colorado on time, but at the airport there was a medical team with armed forces to make sure everyone gets tested for the virus. They were calling it coronavirus. Again, we had to stand in a queue, and one by one, all of us got tested. The virus had already spread across the world, and the World Health Organization had given some guidelines to follow. We had to comply with their rules for the safety of citizens and our families, and were told that we need to quarantine for a week before we can be allowed to go home. No one was ready to do this, especially me, since there were only 3 days left for Christmas, and I was eager to be with my loved ones. I couldn't stay there, so I went ahead and asked a woman who looked like a healthcare worker, "Ma'am, it's Christmas in 3 days, and I have to go to my family. Can't we just go home? Why do we need to do this? On what basis are you making us quarantine? We're passengers, not criminals." She replied calmly, "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but we don't know which one of you might have brought the virus with you, and how many people might get affected by it." Another man in a white coat said, "We need to quarantine you at least until your test results come out." People started protesting and asking questions, but no one was agreeing to this. And I was among those furious ones since all of this made little sense to me. Why don't you quarantine the ones who brought the virus with them instead of doing this to the rest of us? I asked in a frustrated tone. The police officer at the airport got angry and said, "Listen here, lady. As we have been saying, we don't know which one of you has it yet, and this is for your safety. So it would be better if you stop this right now."
I got even angrier after that, and for some reason, I went straight to the man wearing the gray hoodie who sat next to me on the plane, and he was standing in a corner away from other people's eyes. Grabbing him by his collar, I started hitting his nose with brute force and didn't even realize how hard I was hitting him until he stumbled backward while holding his head, as if my punches hurt him a lot. I'm sure my delicate hands didn't hurt him that hard, so why is he behaving this way? I thought to myself.
A fight had already broken out among the passengers by now due to my rebellious act, and officers came forward to try and stop it, but people weren't ready to listen. All of a sudden, the man I punched in the gray hoodie passed out amidst the ruckus, putting a stop to my movements. No one seemed to notice him, and since police and healthcare workers were busy with their attempts to stop the fights that were going on, I went ahead to help him as I was feeling guilty about punching him.
I removed his mask and was shocked to see the stitches around his mouth that were now broken, and he was bleeding. By the looks of it, he probably had surgery around his mouth, explaining why he was wearing a mask. As I noticed that no one had yet noticed him, as they were quite busy having arguments of their own, I quickly put back his mask on his face. The guilt for taking out my anger while thinking of him as the one with the virus and hurting him was taking over my senses, but at that moment I was too terrified to even think straight. While I was trying to figure out what to do, the medical staff noticed the fainted man and came running towards him. He asked me what happened while giving him first aid, and even though I knew it was my fault, I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. So I lied and said, I don't know, I just found him like this. He probably got hit during the fight and he fell on the ground.
Is he going to be okay? I added. Other doctors and medical staff started to notice, and he was immediately taken to the emergency room. The rest of the passengers were taken to a nearby hospital where the quarantine arrangement was for over a week. I'm sure everyone had a hard time during that one long week, but none of them compared to what I went through, because I had submerged myself in guilt, and it was making me sick. After 3 days in quarantine, I couldn't even eat the food that was given to us since it almost felt tasteless. Deep down, I was mad at myself for beating up that guy at the airport and kept thinking about his well-being. Maybe the quarantine was my punishment for hurting him. Christmas passed, and I didn't feel anything about it. I just wanted to get out of that hospital room and run to my family. Finally, the punishment was over, and we were allowed to go home. But before I could get happy, karma hit harder than a rock as one of the medical staff came in while I was getting ready to get home with my report and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you cannot leave as you can see here. You have been tested positive. Please cooperate with us as you need to stay in quarantine a bit longer." Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
No movie will ever compare to the hell that I've gone through the last year. The ordeal seems like it's been one long waking nightmare. It all began normally enough. I just recently got out of a long-term relationship and wasn't looking for anything serious. I figured that I'd give Tinder a shot. It didn't take long for me to get a few matches. I chose the hottest one and we agreed to meet a week later. The date went so well that we decided to do it again, and this became a regular thing until the fourth date. It was beginning to look as if it may grow into something more in spite of my original intentions. As the fourth date wrapped up, I invited her back to my place for a drink. She agreed and things soon got hot and heavy, as they say. We were mere seconds away from taking things all the way when she broke down. I was confused. I'm not an aggressive partner and her behavior up to that point had been very receptive. I asked what was wrong and she said that she had been assaulted by a previous boyfriend. It had been several years and she thought that she had moved past it. I felt bad for her, yet still kind of frustrated, and she got up and dressed quickly. I'll admit it was, like I said, frustrating, but there was little I could do, and I understood where she was coming from. I called her an Uber and she left me with a difficult decision to make. After a long, sleepless night, I decided to just kind of end things there. Some of you reading this may call me cruel, but I couldn't really see another option. Things appeared to just be at an impasse, you know? I wasn't going to wait around until she determined that she was ready, and I sure wasn't going to pressure her into anything, obviously. I told myself that it was for the best. I'd never wanted to jump right into another relationship so quickly. That wouldn't benefit either of us, and I broke things off as kindly as I could. That night never came up. I stressed how I'd felt I'd rushed into things too quickly, and naturally she was a bit upset, but gave no indication of actually being angry. I wished her a happy future and just bid her a goodbye. And normally, that's where it would have ended. I took a month off from dating and Tinder and all that, and when I came back, I matched with a beautiful graduate student just looking to have a good time. This is more of what I was looking for. We met for drinks and hit it off. I went home happy with a spring in my step and a gleam in my eye, as they say. And maybe 2 days passed when I got a call from a neighbor. He informed me that there were leaflets posted all around our neighborhood, calling me an attempted predator. I thought this was his idea of some sick joke and definitely not a good one. I laughed, but he assured me that this wasn't a laughing matter. I demanded proof, and a few minutes later he came to my door with a bright yellow piece of paper, and it claimed the following. On the night of Friday, November 19th, 2021, I was invited on a dinner date with Mr. My Name. After being plied with many glasses of wine, I was pressured into joining him at his home. Although I was clearly unable to consent, Mr. My Name attempted to coax me into his bed. When I refused his advances, he became enraged and threw me onto the street in the middle of the night. Please make sure all your female friends are made aware of the danger they may face by dating this manipulative monster. I can't begin to describe the anger that I felt in that moment. It was made worse when the neighbor asked me if it was true. Of course it wasn't, but when someone asks that type of question, it's a good indication that they believe it. Rather than strangle him, I did my best to assure him it was not. And his reception was less than convincing, but I had more pressing problems at that second. I had to get all those flyers, or whatever you call them, before any more impressionable idiots saw them. I spent most of the day pulling them from light poles and bulletin boards all over town. I'm still not sure if I got them all, and I counted over 200 when all was said and done. Then, out of nowhere, I discovered that I had been banned from Tinder after someone filed a complaint against me. My life felt like it was spiraling out of control, and I was desperate to stop it any way I could. What came next was probably the biggest mistake I'd made during this entire ordeal. I worked myself into such a muddle I did the one thing I shouldn't have. I contacted her via text message to confront her. She promised to retract her claims if I agreed to meet her face to face, and I took the bait like a sucker and drove to her house. We sat down at her kitchen table where she explained how hurt she felt. I wasn't interested in hearing any of it, but I was willing to suffer to save my good name. While she did so, she kept a glass of wine close at hand. She had clearly been drinking even before I arrived. After an hour, everything appeared to be handled. As I prepared to leave, she began coming on to me, and I mean in a very obvious manner, and I almost gave in, but then I remembered our previous problem and I shut her down. She was not pleased. She hissed and walked off toward the kitchen. I figured that she was getting some more wine, and it seemed like a great time to sneak away. I was putting on my jacket when a crash came from the kitchen. I hurried in to see what the matter was and was met by a shrill screeching. She rushed towards me with the stem of a broken wine glass and stabbed me with it. She retracted the jagged stem from the wound and snarled like some freaking animal. I was in shock, and I froze for a brief moment, unsure of how to react. Then she lunged at me again, just missing, and I took off. She pursued me out to my car and pounded on it as I sped off, and I just drove straight to the hospital, calling 911 as I drove. I informed the dispatcher which hospital I could be found at if the police needed to speak to me, and sure enough, an officer arrived as I was being treated for my injury. Luckily for me, she hadn't hit any major arteries or organs or anything like that, and the cop let me know that my assailant had been arrested, but what came next was a complete surprise. I was shocked to learn that she had a previous conviction for stalking and assault, and I surmised that it was a similar situation. Monday came around, and despite what I had hoped, my attacker was given bail. She paid and was out in time for dinner. I was furious and gave the assistant DA a piece of my mind, and while I waited for the trial day to arrive, I remained in a constant state of fear. I could swear that I saw her once or twice over that period, but I was in such a fragile state that it was possibly my imagination. She became all I thought about. My work suffered. Even in my dreams, she often took center stage. She refused several plea deals and insisted the jury would acquit her. I know it was all a stall tactic, and she was assembling all the elements that she would need to what I thought would be to disappear. And the first rumblings began during jury selection. She had not been present for the procedure. Although she wasn't required to be, it didn't bode well. Then when the trial began in earnest, her lawyer was finally forced to admit that he had lost contact with his client several weeks prior. Now today is October 28th as I write this, and she's been missing almost 2 months. I sit around wondering what my future may hold. Hopefully she's done the wise thing and is currently laying low halfway around the world, or something. On the surface that appears to be the case. Yet for some reason, I'm not totally convinced. My former love interest is a highly successful and intelligent woman. It's largely what drew her to me from the beginning. I have a creeping suspicion that she may be focusing her vast resources into getting back at me. Whatever form that may take, I'm not really sure. Naturally, I fear she'll go to the conventional route and just end my life, likely by her own hand, maybe another stabbing. However, she is more than capable to go even further and extend my suffering indefinitely. And this is why I'm going to all the trouble to post my side of the story. I'm well aware I probably come off as a jerk in some circumstances, but I don't care. I just want a record of the truth to be available publicly should I disappear. My lawyer also has a copy in case I'm no longer around to testify on my own behalf. It's doubtless that law enforcement will eventually catch up with her at some point. I'm concerned it will be too late for me, though. So if you learn of the death or a disappearance of some unknown New York State attorney through the media, please remember what you read here.
This story happened just a few years back when I was visiting an old friend in Cologne, while at the same time taking advantage of him as a free stay for a meeting with my LARP group. For those of you who don't know what LARP is, it's basically real-life role-playing. Imagine a D&D game, but instead of people sitting around a table with dice, you have people actually dressed up as their characters, actually role-playing in real life. LARPing has been my hobby since I was 14, and after I got a job that paid pretty well, I started to go a bit more all out when it came to stuff for my hobby. One of the things I spend a solid amount of money on was my character's armor, which is important for this story, and specifically the chainmail I wear under my outer armor. After the meeting of my group, I got mostly out of my LARP outfit, because I really didn't want to walk through Cologne-Mulheim, which is one of the more dangerous parts of the city, dressed as a medieval knight. But since I couldn't fit it all in my backpack, I kept my chainmail on, as well as my tunic and pants. On my bus ride home, I noticed this guy that seemed to have an eye on me, but I assumed it was just because I still looked very out of place. When he got off at the same station as me, I didn't really pay him much attention, and when I was almost at my friend's place, I decided to call him, asking if we should meet and get a doner, which he agreed to before I even ended my question. I arrived at our meeting spot first and waited, when I noticed the guy from the bus again, who was now walking straight towards me. I got closer to the wall to make space, but he didn't pass me. Instead, he stopped before me and pulled a knife on me, demanding my bag, wallet, and phone. I was willing to give him my wallet, but tried to explain to him that the bag only had some armor and foam weapons in it. But it seemed that even just talking was enough to set this guy off, and suddenly I felt 2 fast, stinging punches in my stomach. It hurt like hell, and I dropped down to the floor. Then the guy grabbed my bag. I hardly remember what happened next, as I was barely able to notice anything other than the voice in my head screaming, "You got stabbed." So the next thing I knew, my friend was shaking me, and my bag was open with all my stuff over the ground. He was holding my helmet with blood on it, and he said he saw the guy throwing my stuff around after the bag was almost likely too heavy and big for him. So my friend, seeing me on the floor, managed to grab the first thing he could, which was the helmet, and bashed the guy with it until he ran away. We later checked my stomach, and even though I had 2 giant deep blue bruises that hurt like hell, I only had small cuts, since the chainmail had stopped the knife making too much damage. Until this day, I get sick in the stomach when I think back to it, and remember that if I had not worn a piece of my LARP clothing that day, I would probably be dead. Literally killed over a bag full of costumes, €150 in my wallet, and a 10-year-old phone. This world is so messed up.
born on January 17th of 1991, Lauren Spear was the daughter of Charlene and Robert, an accountancy couple from Scarsdale, New York. After graduating from Edgemont High School in 2009, Lauren enrolled at Indiana University. She was an active and good-natured young student and volunteered for many charitable causes. For example, she had spent the previous spring break planting trees in Israel on behalf of the Jewish National Fund, combining her two passions of travel and public service. As you can imagine, Lauren's attitude made her a very popular young woman, and her circle of friends seems to have been a consistent and positive one. You see, Lauren had met her college boyfriend, Jesse Wolfe, as well as her best friend, Jay Rosenbaum, during a summer camp in the hillside town of Honesdale, PA, and a handful of her other close friends at Indiana University had also attended the summer camp. The point is, it seemed that Lauren was part of a tight-knit unit of friends who both loved and trusted one another, which makes it all the more alarming when we learn what happened to her. On the night of Thursday, June 2nd, 2011, Lauren and her friends visited the nearby Kilroy Sports Bar. In an effort to save on what little cash they had, Lauren and her friends partook in what's known as pre-gaming, where people drink store-bought alcohol before going out to a bar or club. The group of friends were also notorious for only venturing out into the night during the wee small hours. Kilroy's also catered to this kind of crowd, keeping their bar open until 4 in the morning, and CCTV footage from that night doesn't show Lauren and her friends arriving until about 1:46 a.m. For the first 45 minutes or so, everything appears relatively normal. Lauren and her friends have drinks, they dance, they play pool, everything you might expect from a group of college kids soaking up the nightlife. But then, around 2:27 in the morning, Lauren's behavior takes a somewhat bizarre turn. It's around then that Lauren gets up and walks out of the bar, leaving her cell phone on the bar top and her shoes on the floor near her seat. After exiting Kilroy's, she is then quickly followed by a friend named Corey Rossman. Rossman seems confused as to why Lauren left her things behind, but seems only too happy to follow her back to her apartment complex. At exactly 2:30 a.m., Corey and Lauren enter the Smallwood Plaza Apartments complex that Laura called home. It's here they remain for exactly 28 minutes before CCTV once again captures them leaving the apartment complex. Only instead of walking back to the bar, where Lauren's phone and shoes are still sitting there, Lauren and Corey walk down an alleyway that connects College Avenue and Morton Street, the same alley where Lauren's purse and apartment keys would be found the following day. CCTV footage then catches Lauren and Corey arriving at the latter's apartment at around 3 in the morning. This footage shows Lauren to be a little worse for wear, but Corey Rossman is somehow absolutely trashed by this point. Corey's roommate, Michael Beth, later said that he had to clean up a puddle of vomit that Corey left in the stairwell that same night, and that Corey was so drunk that he had to be put to bed. Michael added that once this was done, he then tried to persuade Lauren to sleep over for her own safety. However, Lauren insisted that she wanted to return to her own apartment, probably citing her need to find her missing possessions. And so at 3:30 a.m., Michael Beth called Lauren's friend Jay Rosenbaum, telling him he needed to come take care of her. We can only assume he answered in the affirmative because a short while later, Lauren shows up at Jay's apartment with a rather large bruise under her eye. Jay later said that he was worried about the injury, but after Lauren told him she didn't know how she obtained the bruise, Jay assumed she'd gotten it during a drunken fall from earlier in the evening. However, of all the CCTV footage we have of Lauren and her friends, there are no recorded incidents of falling, and no recorded incidences of people fussing over her eye, which we could then use to estimate the time and place of such an injury. By 4:30 a.m., Lauren hasn't had an alcoholic drink in over 2 hours and is no doubt beginning to sober up. Granted, she wouldn't have been in the best condition of her life, but she is no doubt realizing that she's lost pretty much everything she brought out with her, being her phone, keys, shoes, and purse. In light of this, We can understand why Lauren was reluctant to sleep it off when she could actively go about recovering some of her lost items. Lauren then left Jay Rosenbaum's apartment at around 4:30 that morning, last being sighted on CCTV footage headed south from the intersection of 11th Street and College Avenue. Several hours later, Lauren's boyfriend, Jesse Wolf, sent her a text which she failed to reply to. And when a reply did finally roll in, it was from an employee of Kilroy's sports bar, saying Lauren had left her phone there overnight. Not long after, given he had zero means of getting in touch with her, no one had seen her that morning. Jesse contacted the local campus police to report Lauren missing. After 3 weeks of fruitless search, August of 2011 saw local police and FBI agents undertake a week-long search of the nearby Sycamore Ridge landfill site. Needless to say, it wasn't looking good for Lauren, as cops were evidently looking for a body, or more accurately, parts of a body, as opposed to a living, breathing person. But despite their efforts, law enforcement didn't manage to find a single shred of evidence that clued them into Lauren's condition or where she might be. The investigation dragged on for years without a break, and this is in spite of more than 3,000 tips called in from the general public. Then, on the morning of April 25, 2015, a hint of Lauren's fate was unearthed not far from where she went missing, yet it goes without saying that it was not a good one. The lifeless corpse of a University of Indiana student, Hannah Wilson, was discovered in neighboring Brown County. She was last seen getting into a taxi in front of the very same bar that Lauren had visited on the night of her disappearance. Lying on the ground near her body was a cell phone, one that police determined was owned by a local 50-year-old man by the name of Daniel Messel. He was arrested, tried, and convicted of Hannah's murder, and police deduced that he might well be the same person responsible for Lauren Spearer's disappearance too. However, in July of that same year, nationally renowned private investigator Bo Dietl concluded that after his own extensive investigation, he'd found nothing to seriously link Hannah's murder to Lauren's apparent abduction, and any similarities were purely coincidental. Yet right when it seemed that all hope was lost, the winter that followed Hannah Wilson's murder saw the FBI pursue its first serious lead. In the early hours of January 28, 2016, FBI agents were assisted by local law enforcement in serving a search warrant to a property in the 2900 block of Old Morgantown Road in Martinsville, approximately 20 miles north of Bloomington. The rather dry official statement from law enforcement was that they were following up on leads and tips in Morgan County regarding the disappearance of Lauren Spearer. But in reality, they had strong suspicions that a man named Justin Wagers was responsible for her murder or abduction. Wagers, who lived with his mother and stepfather, had been named and identified on multiple occasions as having exposed himself to local women during incidents that were characterized by aggressive and generally terrifying displays of depravity. Cops let cadaver dogs loose in the Wagers' home and found that they indicated for human remains in a nearby barn. However, after conducting a dig and sifting dirt from the floor of the structure, investigators found zero evidence of anyone having been buried there. As the years went by, Lauren's parents sadly announced that they believed their daughter to be deceased. Yet they've also been very open about their suspicions that someone very close to her may have been involved in her disappearance. Not only have they wondered aloud if someone might have slipped something in her drink while she was at Kilroy's, they also had no qualms with casting suspicion on the men she was with that night. Lauren's boyfriend at the time, Jesse Wolf, has also professed his distrust of Corey Rossman, Michael Beth, and Jay Rosenbaum, as not only did all three refuse to take police-issued polygraph tests, but all three lawyered up in the days following her disappearance, apparently completely unprompted to do so, as she was still considered very much alive at that time. Rossman, Beth, and Rosenbaum then publicly stated that they had passed privately administered polygraph tests, which apparently proved their innocence. They were also completely unapologetic regarding them hiring attorneys, and stated that their refusal to cooperate with Bloomington police was down to them not trusting law enforcement. A theory was batted around that Lauren may have died as a result of a drug overdose, one resulting from narcotics obtained from either Rossman, Beth, or Rosenbaum. If that was the case, it's plausible that all three or a combination of the men could have conspired to dispose of her body so that their guilt would never be suspected. Obviously, hiring lawyers and refusing to take a polygraph doesn't exactly make the three guys look good. But in all fairness, it's highly inadvisable to talk to police officers without a lawyer present, especially since all three guys knew well their friend was missing. What's more, polygraphs are so unreliable that they're no longer admissible in court, and the police were most likely just looking to get the three guys in an interview room so they could browbeat them into incriminating themselves. So, in light of that, we have to consider other options. But having exhausted the possibilities of either Daniel Messel or Justin Wager having killed her, time and time again we're forced to consider the accidental overdose angle. I truly don't think it was a random abduction. I think that somebody that Lauren knew was responsible for the events of that evening, her mother publicly stated in 2014. And she may well be correct. Statistically, most people are murdered by someone they know, sometimes pretty intimately too. And it doesn't seem out of the question that those three young men with big, bright futures ahead of them wouldn't want to throw them away by admitting they'd given a girl too much to drink or too much of something a little less than legal. So as much as people focus on stranger danger, or of that random creeper who becomes the source of their untimely demise, maybe people should start looking a little closer to home, to those who profess to love or care for us, who might actually disappear us, dispose of our body, or bury our names, just to protect themselves.
I live here in New Zealand, and late in 2018, I was feeling sort of lonely, so I decided to download the dating app Tinder to try and find myself a nice guy to go on a few dates with, maybe even find myself a long-term boyfriend out of it. I ended up matching with this guy who'd come over from Australia, and we chatted for 2 weeks before we finally met up. The conversation was quite light, nothing too heavy, and it was fun. Like I said, it was from Australia. So we talked about Aussie things, and I remember telling him how much I wanted to visit Melbourne. He said that he'd been there once or twice and started making recommendations for some great coffee shops that he knew of. He seemed like a nice, normal guy, and when we agreed to meet, I was happy to do that. But then maybe 5 days or so before we were due to meet, he got really persistent and impatient. He would text me multiple times in a day, and if I didn't reply straight away, he would ask if something was wrong. I thought it was weird that he was being so clingy after starting off so confident. He kept trying to bring the date forward, so we could meet up sooner and would totally forget. If I had told him I was busy on a particular day, almost like he wasn't paying attention or didn't care about what I had to say. It was honestly really unusual for someone to be that persistent with me. I did guys before who were maybe a bit persistent, but only have a nervous excitement. Different kind of excitement than this awesome guy seemed to be. I just couldn't understand why it was that he could not possibly wait until the Sunday that we'd arranged to meet. It felt very narcissistic, and I should have seen it as the red flag that it was and not just meet up with him at all. I had the messages saved on my phone for a while, so I had a record of the exact dates and times that he sent some of the messages. So on the 2nd of December, he messaged me just after 9 a.m. saying, "Good morning, how are you?" And again about an hour and a half later. I didn't reply to the first message because I was asleep, but I think he took it the wrong way because he said it was fine if I changed my mind and didn't feel like going on the date. That was when I messaged him back and confirmed that I would meet him later on that day. We met up and went to a place called Revelry. It's a very standard bar, very popular, and lots of people go there, but it's definitely more of a nighttime bar. I had never drunk there during the afternoon or the daytime, but it was open, seemed like it had a chill atmosphere, and he wanted to go there, so that's where we went. He was a bit bigger than the pictures on his Tinder profile showed, and it was obvious that he had put on a little bit of weight. He had big distinctive eyes and he was very, very clean cut. I mean, like his clothes looked freshly washed and ironed. He was also very well groomed, obviously took good care of his skin and stuff like that, like he was really good looking. I remember asking him a lot of different questions, and he just sort of talked to me. He tried to ask me a few questions, but they weren't very in-depth ones. I thought he was a bit nervous, to be honest, but that's not unusual for a first date. But things start to sort of unravel at one point, because he had said one thing in messages about where he worked and a different thing on the date. I started to feel a bit uneasy, like I wanted to trust him, but as soon as he started to put on some inconsistencies, I began to wonder if he was just lying about stuff to impress me, because he was from Australia. I asked him the whereabouts that he had met his Kiwi friends, and he told me that all his friends were police officers or somehow involved in law enforcement. He said how he had met with them while out drinking in various bars. Have they gotten to know each other over time, and they regularly invite him back to their places over barbecues and stuff like that. He also mentioned that his best friend from Australia was coming over to be a Crown Court prosecutor. That's why I noticed that a lot of the stuff that he was talking about kind of had this running theme to it. It kind of seemed like he was obsessed with that sort of thing, which in hindsight explains an awful lot. I think he was sort of trying to process some of the things that he had been up to over the previous few days, and it came out in his conversation style. He obviously thought an awful lot about policemen, dead bodies, and ways people can be killed, prosecution justice in the court system, and it just came out in a very strange way like that on our first date. Like I said before, we talked quite a lot about him being friends with lots of different policemen, and he went into quite a bit of depth regarding the details of certain investigations that they apparently shared with him. He said that we're having a really tough time around the time because of bodies going missing in the White Toggy Ranges. He told me that police corpse sniffing dogs can only detect decaying flesh about 4 feet deep under the soil, so if the bodies are buried in a deeper than that, the police won't be able to find them. I thought it was a bit of a morbid thing to talk about on the first date, but it was an interesting fact nonetheless. He also got into a conversation about all the different kinds of poisonous snakes in Australia, and he became quite animated about it. He obviously had a passion for the natural world. It was quite out there, but I thought it was cute. I love animals too, so I was glad we had something in common and made me feel a bit more relaxed again. But then, right as I started feeling comfortable with him again, he started telling me this really bizarre and creepy story. He told me how crazy it is that a guy can make one little mistake and then go to jail for the rest of his life for it. He went on to tell me about this guy he knew back in Oz who had consensual intimacy involving choking with his girlfriend, then that ended up accidentally killing her in the process. He assured me that the whole thing was a horrible, tragic accident, how things just went wrong suddenly, and how the guy was really upset because he loved her and would never hurt her on purpose. But still, the guy got done for manslaughter and was sent to prison for a long, long time. What I know now is this could have been him testing on his story on me when he was able to see that I was a bit uncomfortable with what he was saying. He tried to change the subject, so we could talk about more mundane things. I didn't try to make a swift exit or anything. I'm quite used to dealing with all sorts of people. And I'm not saying people who talk about dark things on the first date are like bad people or anything, but it was definitely weird. We hung out for a while, but after about 3 hours or so, I made some excuses as to why I had to leave, and we said goodbye. As we were parting ways, he said, "My car is this way," and pointed off down a particular road. My car was down the same road. But at that stage, I was feeling uneasy and my instincts had just kicked in telling me to walk a different way. He was also a lot bigger than me, so if something went wrong, I knew I wouldn't be able to defend myself. In hindsight, it was a good decision. It was my intuition sense. My brain was saying this was strange. That was strange. And looking back on it now, it is really strange to think of who he actually was. I don't think it is the realm of what normal human brains can comprehend. But just the day before we met up, the guy was out on that first date with had murdered a girl in his hotel room, a British girl called Grace MacLeod. The reason he had brought up his friend accidentally strangling his girlfriend is because that's exactly how he'd killed her. Although whether or not he was on purpose is another question entirely. Also, the reason he had mentioned the whole Toggery mountain range is because that's where he ended up disposing of her body. And all that other stuff about sniffer dogs was research that he'd been doing the previous night that was still sort of consuming his mind. It is hard to look back and think that that had just happened to her. From what I understand, while we were on our date, her body was still in that hotel room of his, hidden under the bed or something, wrapped in a blanket. There's nothing I could have done. And I know that now, but it is still really hard to come to terms with that. I do think if it had been a date in the evening, potentially, I could have been a victim. I take a lot of solace in the fact that I do have my wits about me, and do take safety in online dating quite seriously. And that is nothing against any women who are willing to go home with someone on the first date. But I do want to say to young women who take one more step in your thinking when you're on a date, to see how well you know this person actually. Since then, I have been on dates with lovely, trustworthy men, but think how well do I really know them? It has made me go a little slower and divulge a little less personal information to them. I know in modern dating, it is quite common to give people your Instagram handle, but you aren't giving people access to a lot of personal information. It is really dangerous. And I just want to encourage people to take a step back and think before they do that. There's nothing wrong with taking a step back, taking it slow and pacing yourself a bit. Alcohol has a big effect. It is part of the social fabric of dating and part of life these days, but it still comes with a massive risk. Women need to be really aware of how much they are drinking on dates, and unfortunately, drinks are sometimes spiked. We live in this world where people are still idealistic about how things should be on dates. But incidents like these take things back 10 or 20 years, or women are still having to grip their keys between their fingers, or can't leave a drink on the table. We aren't as developed as we think we are in areas such as dating. Technology has gotten ahead of us. I think people are as they always are. I think with the advancement of technology, we thought we would become more refined. But we are just the same, but with new technology. I think the invention of dating apps is a wonderful thing, and I wouldn't want to live in a world without that. But I just wished for a world where women don't have to think about their safety all the time.
Many years ago, my husband and I took our kids on vacation to Sri Lanka. The flights were quite tough on them. I remember my son puking his guts up because his blood sugar was so low, and my little girl's ears popped so bad that she cried for the entire descent into Colombo. I promised them that it'd be worth it, but I was also terrified that they'd just end up hating it once we were there. But thank God, my son was sold on the idea as soon as he saw some of the wildlife, and when my daughter saw miles upon miles of gorgeous sandy beaches, she too suddenly forgot how grim the 17-hour flight was. So, at one point, my husband is off taking my son down some jungle-side roads in what was basically a walking safari tour, while me and our daughter relaxed on the beach. Anna had just turned 6, so she was just a little ball of energy who burned herself out digging in the sand and playing in the surf. So as long as I keep an eye, and plenty of sunblock on her, I was free to just relax and soak up the sun. Then at one point, I just hear, Mommy, look! Doggy! I open my eyes and feel them straining from the intense sunlight, but there, clear as day, just a few hundred yards down the beach, was a dog. Anna loved dogs, and she'd point them out wherever she went, a trait that I can assure you has never left her. So I just gave her a, "Oh, isn't that nice, honey? Just remember they might not want to be petted like our dogs." I know that sounds weird, but one of the things we were warned was that there's no mass vaccination of animals in Sri Lanka, not to mention very little in the ways of formal dog training. That meant that not only were they considerably more likely to bite you should you catch one in a bad mood, but it meant that that bite could lead to some very, very nasty infections. But try explaining that to a 6-year-old. So me and my husband just went with what amounted to Sri Lankan dogs can get very grumpy because of the heat, and they don't like being petted like Nana's dog does. Knowing how grumpy and tense heat made her, she ate up our excuse without many questions. So, like I said, I acknowledged the dog, then just closed my eyes again and carried on sunbathing. A minute later I hear, Mommy, look, another doggy." Again, I open my eyes, make myself a little sun visor with my hand, and look down the beach to see 2 dogs this time. They're both these blonde mongrel things, their breed indistinguishable as the result of probably hundreds of years of unchecked breeding. They hadn't caused us any trouble at that point, because as much as they were actually wild dogs, they were still quite chilled out. The beach cafes fed them leftovers to keep them sweet, so they spent most of their days just sleeping to beat the heat. Trouble was, they were decidedly unpredictable, and could be your average tail-wagging good boy one minute, then something distinctly different the next. So, as I said, I look up to see 2 dogs this time. They were playing in the sand, getting close to the water, then rushing back whenever a wave crashed in. Admittedly, it was very sweet, so I watched them playing for a minute before my eyes begin to close over again. A bit more time goes by, longer than between the first 2 of Anna's dog sightings. Then all of a sudden, I hear, Mommy, look, Mommy." This time, Anna is much further down the beach than the first 2 times she'd called me, and there's not 1 or 2 additional dogs on the beach. There's an entire pack of them. There must have been about 20 different dogs on the beach for the 3rd time I opened my eyes. There was a tiny little Jack Russell, some long-eared spaniel type, dogs of all shapes and sizes. But the one that was apparently leading the pack was this giant, moody-looking Doberman. It was quite surreal, actually, seeing a pack of feral dogs just wandering around together like that. I can't speak for everyone, but where I'm from, you'd never actually see a stray dog roaming the streets, or not at least anymore. A lost dog maybe, but a legitimate pack of strays? Not a chance. But in Sri Lanka, seeing what appeared to be a live-action version of an all-canine Disney film was a relatively common occurrence. At first, I give a little chuckle and reach for my phone to get a picture. But just as I do, I give the whole scene another look. 6-year-old daughter, pack of stray dogs. She's slowly wandering towards them. They're paying her increasingly more attention as more and more dogs stop playing and begin to look in her direction. It was this huge uh-oh moment, and as it hit me, I got up, took my flip-flops off in preparation to run, and started calmly calling out for Anna to walk back to me. I tried my best to keep calm, I really did, but Anna must have been able to just detect the panic in my voice. She stops to look around to me, this nervous look on her face, and as she does, the dogs start walking down the beach towards her, one by one. I was saying, "Walk back to Mommy, Anna. Walk back to Mommy," trying to emphasize the walking part because I knew the dog would only chase her if she ran. They were all staring her down, ears pricked up, and I'm praying for them to just stay put, but as Anna looked back, saw that they were closer, and started to run, they gave chase. What I felt next, I don't think I can even call it fear. I had to put myself in between those dogs and my daughter, even if it meant me getting hurt. That's just what a mother does. I wouldn't even say I'm a particularly brave person, but I didn't think twice, and I suppose that just speaks to the power of motherly instincts. I sprint forward, position myself between Anna and the charging dogs, then begin banging my flip-flops together, screaming. I waved my arms in the air, jumped up and down, banging the flip-flops intermittently, and I must have looked like an absolute maniac, but my God, did it work. If all those dogs just carried on rushing me, they could have taken me down in seconds, but my wild display had them literally stopping in their tracks. Or rather, once I'd managed to psych the Doberman out, the rest lost their spunk. I still remember it like it was yesterday, seeing him or her make this goofy, scared dog face before it literally skidded in the sand, turned tail, and ran away. As I turned around to comfort the now hysterical Anna, I realized that pretty much everyone that was sunbathing, chilling in beachside cafes, or swimming had emerged to watch. And I do mean watch. Not a single one of them came to check on us, and in the end, it was actually some little Sri Lankan surfer type that ran over to ask if we were okay. He was swiftly followed by the owner of the cafe we'd been visiting. He checks us over, sees that we haven't been bitten, then invites us back up to the cafe's patio. Within seconds, he presents my daughter with a huge bowl of chocolate ice cream, and the man was a genius in my mind. She went from absolutely inconsolable to gently sobbing to fine within about 15 minutes. Don't get me wrong, she was still a bit freaked out following the whole thing. Anyone would be. But we palmed her off by saying they just wanted to play. But they might get a little rough, so it's best to stay near mommy and daddy whenever there's lots of doggies around. This made sense to her, and she was back to thinking Sri Lanka was the best place ever in no time. I suppose this has been a quite long-winded way of saying that no, it's not a terrible idea to take your kids on vacation to more exotic places. Yes, there can be risks, but I honestly feel like the net benefit is high enough to make it totally worth it. Just be sure to do your research, and remember that a seemingly harmless situation can turn into a dangerous one in a remarkably uncomfortable amount of time.
Before I even get to my story, I want to emphasize the point of me writing this. There was more than enough blame for what happened to go around for all of us. The decision was ours to cut corners. Trusting our mother's home to a stranger was stupid. No one denies that. However, the events that unfolded as a result were 100% not our fault. We did everything society tells us to do. The police were called, and their job was to protect my sister. They failed in their job. This is on their hands. My number one aim is to impress upon you to know that it's important to fully vet any individual before allowing them to access your home. The following story is written to drive home this very important point. At the end of 2019, just before Christmas in fact, my mother passed away from a long-term illness. So I was already married and set up a home on my own. My mother left her home to my younger sister, Emily. Emily had been renting up until this time. Release was just ended, so she moved in until she was sure of what she was going to do with it. She knew she had my support. Regardless of her decision, my wife and I threw her a surprise housewarming party for her. At the party, one of Emily's coworkers gave her a kitten as a gift. She was unable to have any pets in her apartment. It was love at first sight. The weeks after the party were life as usual for all of us. Emily managed to litter train the kitten, and all was going well. Just before Valentine's Day, Emily's employer notified her of a business conference she was required to attend. It was part of her job, and this will be a first trip since she had moved into the new house. Normally, this will be simple, but now with the kitten, things were a tad more complicated. My family was unable to watch the kitten because of my daughter's allergies. Kenneling was briefly considered until the price was found to be too great. Besides, she didn't like the idea of her precious little angel being locked up for 3 days. She chose to search on Craigslist for house sitters. An earlier call to a service proved too high. Also, she found this young girl around 19 who claimed to be an independent house sitter. They spoke first on the phone, then met at the house so she could look around. The girl seemed kind and professional. After agreeing on an amount, the deal was set. 2 weeks later, Emily kissed her kid goodbye and left her trip. She checked in the first night, and all sounds like it was going well. 2 days later, she returned to a nightmare. The clean, beautiful home she had left was now scattered with clothes and dirty dishes. When she confronted the girl got mad and said she wasn't a maid. Things only got worse from there. My sister was horrified to see that the litter box was full, and the kitten had already begun going on the floor. Certainly not the poor cat's fault. And this infuriated my sister, and she refused to pay the girl. An argument broke out, and the police were eventually called. They really couldn't do much other than force the girl to leave the property, but the girl was furious. She vowed she'd get back at my sister as she left. This was all set in front of the police, but they obviously didn't take that threat seriously. The officer went on their way, and my sister began cleaning up the mess inside. A few days passed, and Emily tried to put the experience behind her. That Friday, soon after returning from work, a man rang the doorbell and asked for her. She identified herself, and the man began demanding the money owed to the young girl. My sister calmly explained the situation, but the only grew more aggressive. Although she was now terrified, she held her ground and refused. This was when the man backhanded her. She fell back and hit her head on the floor. Unfortunately, it wasn't done. He approached her and demanded the money again. My sister, who was clearly concussed, didn't answer, so he punched her unconscious. Apparently, while she was out, he entered the house and stole all the cash from her purse. But the time she had awakened, he was gone. It took her several minutes to crawl to her phone and call 911. They arrived soon after, and she was rushed to the hospital. I'm happy to say that there's no long-term physical injuries, but mentally, Emily was a mess, and still is, honestly, to be frank. And I know the identity of the man and his location and would have killed him. Fortunately, I regained my senses and agreed to leave it in the authorities' hands, despite their inability to prevent it. The responsible parties were found and arrested within a couple of days. It wasn't some great mystery after all. The man who assaulted Emily was an ex-boyfriend of the young girl. She had promised him half of the money to retrieve it. The young girl claimed she never or intended anyone to be hurt. But her threat in front of witnesses, cops at that, sealed her fate. She managed to get away with probation because she had no priors or acts. On the other hand, had a long record. He was given 3 years. But once the COVID crisis began, he was released early. The entire family was less than happy to hear of the lenient sentences. But criminals getting off easy is now new under the sun of these days. In the months since the attack, everyone has done their most to be there for Emily. Her recovery is going well, and she seems to be responding to therapy. The lockdowns approved the blessing for her. She'd been able to heal at a much slower and calm pace. Until restrictions are lifted completely, she'd been approved to work from home, or little furry friend has served as a priceless companion for her during these terrible times. Although some may say he was the cause of this whole awful mess. Uncle glad he's been around to keep her company. I worked at Target in around 2010. It was a cool job. All I had to do was sit around, do the paperwork, and other things people do. I was the manager at the Target, and I got hooked up as a manager because my cousin had a good relation with the store owner. I was around 25 when I got the job, and I had no experience prior, so getting that job was a privilege, and I very well knew it. So I was one of those managers who worked too much, even though there was less physical work to do. but I was knee-deep in all the paperwork. The thing with Target is that it is a big store, and the thing with big stores is that it comes with a large number of annoying people. Target is a big store, and a day don't go by that there's not some lady or middle-aged man flipping out over the products. It was one headache that we constantly had to go through, and even though we were not allowed to really be aggressive to customers, there are times when you want to do things to them that you cannot really do. But there isn't much you can do than just sit and listen and solve whatever issue they are having. It is tough, but it is something that we have to do in order to make it better. One day, things were very hectic at the store, and it was then that things got out of hand with one of the customers. Things were as usual as they always were, and the store was busy. The chaos was being managed just fine, and when we thought things cannot be weirder, they did, spiraling into a chaotic shit fest when suddenly an angry customer wanted a refund. And we told him about the refund policy, but he just won't admit that he was at the wrong one here, and we had no choice but to call in security. He wanted to talk to me, and I told him there was no way that we could do anything about the thing, and he was quite aggressive about it and demanded to see me. I got out, and then he told me, "You better give me my refund or it's going to be really bad for you. I will make sure you shit bricks for the rest of your lives." I looked at him and I said, "Sir, our refund policy is a bit different, and the product you brought in has been used like multiple times. We cannot really refund you your money, but if you want us to replace your product, we can happily do that." And the man looked furious and said, "I want my money, dumb bitch." And I told him that it cannot possibly be done. He told me that he will come back for me and teach me a lesson. Now, it wasn't the first time that I was being told that my life is in danger, but then it wasn't the first time that someone said that they will kill me. But this time, the man was bigger than anyone I have seen, and his eyes were red as the sky during sunset. He was accompanied out of the store by the police. I wasn't really scared by the man. More like this time it felt like it was more real than before. And this time, it felt like the warnings were somehow real. As the police accompanied him away from the store, I could see his red eyes filled with anger and hate looking right at me, as if he wants to kill me. I called in the inspector in the evening asking whether the man was released from the prison, and the policeman said, "We had nothing against him. He did not really commit a crime, he was just being an asshole. We don't really put people in jail if they are assholes." I said, "He wanted to kill me. I think you should have kept him in the prison." The policeman replied with a chuckle. "He was probably coked out of his mind. He probably doesn't remember you, and secondly, if he does, don't worry. We will arrest him before he kills you." Now, the way he talked all sarcastic and wise-ass, I didn't think that the police will be much help when the guy comes in and tries to kill me in the store. I was slowly getting paranoid by all of it. There was something about the rage in this guy, and I could see. I was having flashbacks of his eyes with volcanic anger. I was scared for my life. Moreover, I was scared, what if he finds out where I live? It will be so much easier for him to just come in and strangle me while I was vulnerable. I wasn't sure about this guy, and he was easily in my head this time completely. I made sure that I am not being followed. The first thing I did was buy a taser. I did not want to be defenseless if he approaches me. I wasn't the one to be fooled around with. I was thinking of buying a gun before, but that would be too irrational of a response. Now that I think of it, every response that I had was irresponsible. I remember having nightmare about the guy confronting me in the parking and killing me. It's like never before. It was the Monday morning, and all my weekend had been spent thinking about what if the man confronts me? What will I do, and how will I defend myself? So I was a bit cranky and anxious the Monday morning into work. I stepped out of my car where it was parked and went about my day. The day went calm and easy, and there was no angry man spotted, and surprisingly, the Monday went by easy. There was no confrontation this Monday, and things went smooth. So I was a bit relaxed, and there was no sign of that big man anywhere. And then, as I was moving to the parking lot as the day was ending, and I was getting back after closing in the shop and getting done with all the accounts and paperwork, I saw the light flickering the parking, and it was just me and the other car in the parking lot. I did not know who it was. I looked at it. and I was a bit nervous, and there was this eerie feeling that I had that something wrong is about to happen. And then I slowly approached my bag and took the taser in my hand. I had that feeling that somebody was standing over me. I looked back, and I saw the same old man standing tall right behind me, and before he can do or say anything, I reacted with the fight or flight reaction. But instead of running, I stood my ground and I tased him. And as I tased him, he fell. And as he was getting down, I could see the flowers dropping out of his hands, and I was realizing that I had acted too fast. I saw the man picking up, trying to get back to his senses, and then looked at me and said, "Well, fair enough. Guess we are even. I'm sorry for my behavior earlier. I apologize." And then handed me the flower, and told me to give it to the staff. And I asked him if he's alright, and apologized for tasing him. Well, good thing I am not worried about him killing me anymore, for he knows that the tables can turn on him too.